Hello and welcome to World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Wang Yizhi in Beijing. Coming up on today's program, the 8-day InnoTech Expo is underway in Hong Kong, where some of the brightest, most innovative achievements from the Chinese mainland are on display. Will this inspire young minds and transform the next generation of innovation? And a billionaire who made his fortune off China's real estate says it's the biggest bubble in history. How will a hiked-up housing market affect the middle class? Welcome again. We begin in Hong Kong, where InnoTech Expo 2016 is underway. The 8-day science and technology exhibition showcases the achievements made by Chinese mainland and Hong Kong scientists, firms, as well as entrepreneurs. Take a look at this.
A technical spectacle. InnoTech Expo 2016 in Hong Kong has attracted and intrigued many members of the public. And it's no surprise why. Some 50 different kinds of cutting-edge technologies are on display, offering them a learning opportunity and a rare insight into the achievements of the Chinese mainland. At the opening ceremony last Saturday, former Chief Executive Dong Xihua called on residents in Hong Kong to assimilate into the national strategy. If there's one exhibit not to be missed, it's this one. China's foray into space exploration has been long fascinating. And now, the public can see up close modules of the Long March carrier rockets, as well as parts from the Chang'e lunar probes and the Shenzhou manned spacecraft. Putting on VR glasses in the aerospace zone, visitors can experience how it is like in space.
I have an experience of looking around in space, and I think it's talking about the space and travels tours, and I think this really a new experience for me to explore more on the space.
It's amazing. I feel I can really walk out of the sky in the space. I surprised when I came here. I see a lot of different models. They spend a lot of effort to make this explode. Yeah.
Another hot exhibit is a model of Jiaolong, a deep-sea submersible which can hit depths of up to 7,000 meters.
That's made in China, so we're so proud of it. I'm so happy to stand by it.
Other highlights include the Beidou navigation satellite system, Tianhe-2, one of the world's fastest computers, as well as the world-renowned China Railway high-speed train, which has impressively broken speed records 8 times. The 8-day expo will expect thousands of visitors, especially youngsters and students. And to make sure that they go home inspired, easy-to-understand lectures and seminars are held alongside the demonstrations. Who knows? These young minds could very well pioneer the next breakthrough technology.
For more discussion on this year's InnoTech Expo, we have in Beijing studio Professor Zhang Fan from the Gravitational Wave and Cosmology Laboratory at Beijing Normal University. In Hong Kong, we have Professor Tony Chan. He is one of the advisors to InnoTech and also the president of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Also joining us from Hong Kong is Mr. Robert Cap, the network director of the Economist Corporate Network in Beijing, as well as the author of Clusters of Creativity. Welcome, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Tony. So InnoTech Expo showcases some of the major achievements technologically as well as scientifically. So what do you think of this expo? Does it showcase, does it indicate the level of China's expertise in science and technology?
Yeah, I think it does. I was there. I mean, it shows that China has made huge investment and is seeing some results. Some of the developments are really world-class, and some of them are still catching up. The supercomputers, 2 of the top 10 supercomputers in the world is now produced by China. China now have a vibrant space program. But on the other hand, for example, China is only now producing, commercial aircraft that is of the size of the A320 or the Boeing 737 in the C919. But there's one thing that's quite sure, that is China is determined and has a long-term strategy to develop science and technology. And you have to remember that China started on this only recently. 30 years ago, China was opening up, and it was unthinkable to have the result we have today. Even 20 years ago, with the economy back then, it's still very difficult to achieve what it has done today. So it's quite amazing.
Let me turn to you, Mr. Robert Kemp. So some of the people that have seen the exhibition, the InnoTech exhibition in Hong Kong, say this is full of heavy machinery. For instance, deep sea diving, for instance, aerospace exploration program. So what do you think? Is it so high tech that ordinary people cannot understand?
I don't know if it's beyond the realm of comprehension. Certainly some of it seems esoteric, like deep sea diving. But indeed, that is one of, although it's not as sexy, say, as space exploration, this is one field where China dominates. They have pioneered new depth record that weren't achieved by any other nation previously. So when you think about it, like space exploration being very popular, nevertheless, the United States landed man on the moon nearly 50 years ago, and China has yet to do that. There's a long way ahead in terms of space, but already in deep sea, in an area where other nations have ignored opportunities, China has literally dived in very deep. And I think that's particularly impressive. High-speed rail is another area where China kind of came from nowhere, but having a very big need for high-speed rail itself has now become a world leader in high-speed rail. I think those sorts of accomplishments are really significant. And while deep-sea diving may not be that understandable to the public at large, I think they can appreciate it generally, and certainly things like high-speed rail are definitely appreciable.
Let me turn to our studio guest here, Mr. Zhang Fan. So like our Hong Kong guest, Mr. Robert Kep there mentioned, some of the technologies showcased in Hong Kong are really easygoing in terms of relating to people, ordinary people. But what about aerospace science? It's of course an eye-catching program, but some of the people will be concerning if it's really that related to ordinary people. And also is always a concern that why we should spend so much money in aerospace exploration instead of helping people, alleviating them from poverty. So what's your answer to this question?
Well, so of course there's a balance that needs to be addressed. How much money you actually spend on the cutting edge research, how much money you put on stuff that you can see immediate results. But I have to say, being a scientist myself, my worldview is that science is the thing that pushes you forward. You can't just improve people's livelihood just by expanding current level of technologies, indefinitely expanding the production. You're going to run out of resources sooner or later, right? So in terms of space exploration, it's not completely useless. So right now, although the manned space program looks like it's mostly for technology, learning the ropes of how to get man into space, but actually the newly launched Tiangong 2 this month, that was a fully fledged space laboratory. There's actually proper experiments, things like see how plants grow in there, whether you can improve the yield of rice from that. So that's very close to people's lives, actually.
Tony, I would like to continue to ask this question because some of the programs are showcased in InnoTech, for instance, the high-speed railway, the aerospace exploration program, are national initiatives instead of initiated by private companies. So is that a concern?
Why should it be a concern? I mean,
because,
if you look around the world, there are many programs, especially large, program like space program. They're always national. Maybe you can expand a little bit.
Yeah, because I think, in my opinion, sometimes private companies can be more flexible, more profitable, for instance, instead of making this space exploration purely a national interest, a showcase of its muscles, for instance.
Well, in large-scale science and technology, especially in the beginning, often at the national level, the country has to take a lead. If you look at the U.S., because after Sputnik, you have NASA, and it's now after 50 or 60 years, you have SpaceX that is trying to do a private space program. So I think China is only starting now. So I think that's pretty normal.
All right, Mr. Robert Kemp, would you like to follow up on this?
I think the latter point Tony made is rather intriguing, that you have things like SpaceX. We have individuals, entrepreneurs, world-famous entrepreneurs, Richard Branson in the UK, Elon Musk now in the US, and they are leading the charge of private investment into space exploration. I think that's very exciting. I think Tony's right for indicating that originally in the United States, indeed, we had the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. That was in response to a Soviet effort to explore space through Sputnik and so forth. So it's not unusual to have government involved. But I think you've raised a very good question, Natalie, and that is, shouldn't at this time in economic development globally more private investment be involved? Would that increase efficiency? I mean, one thing the Chinese economy is facing as an issue is inefficiency in the state sector, and it's trying to do supply-side reform. So maybe there should be more attention to trying to involve the private sector in these sorts of initiatives.
Since we already talked about investments, no matter it's national investment or private investment, let's take a look at this context. In 2014, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, recorded that China spent almost $350 billion on research and development. That's 2% of its total gross domestic product. 14 years ago, it only invested $41 billion, just 0.8% of its GDP. So many believe that China's investment on research and development ensures breakthroughs are made. So what do you think, Mr. Zhang Fan? Is the increase in expenditure paying?
The short answer is yes. So one thing I would like to emphasize is that although when we talk about science and technology, we always think of this national prestige projects like space program, but actually most of that $350 billion goes into like product development. Companies spend on improving microwaves and stuff like that. And from that point of view, it's certainly paying off. So I just decorated my apartment, and everything I buy is Chinese brand. And I would venture to say, actually, they're even performing better than their big name Western counterparts now. So I would say that's paying off. So
since you mentioned this, is Chinese investment?
Can I jump into this?
Yes, of course, Tony.
Yeah, because at least in the area of basic science, I mean, China's investment has already achieved some amazing results. For example, in neutrino physics, if you look at one of the top 10 science breakthroughs in the year 2012, it was the neutrino experiment done in Daya Bay, which is very close to Hong Kong. And if you look at the recent space program, one of the satellites that was sent up to space was on quantum communication. In fact, China did was the first to do that. So those are not just overnight. I'm sure is a result of a long-term investment.
And Tony, also, do you think that China's investment on keeping its talent is sufficient?
That actually is a very important question. To develop science and technology and innovation in the long run, of course, you need money. You need a long-term plan, but most important is talent. Now, if you look at China, China has a huge population, 1.3 billion people. And out of that, really, you have top talents, they're producing every year. In fact, many of those are studying in Hong Kong and studying in the West. So there's no shortage of talent. I think the key is how to harness these talents, how to show them that, China is in it in the long term for real, and to have the funding to paint a bright future so that people choose this field to invest their own lives in. That's the key.
Although we have a program called 1,000 People, which means that we are harnessing 1,000 people, experts and professors and talents in science and technology from abroad and here in China, to gather them, to give them projects, to give them money, to give them projects, to fund them from their projects, support their experiments. Do you think that program is working? Is it effective, Mr. Zhang Fan?
Yeah, I would say it's working. So basically, different branches of the Chinese government, they all have their own programs to encourage people to come back to China to do research. And together, when combined, they pushes up the salary level to be maybe not level, but at least not ridiculously low as compared to Western counterparts. So for overseas Chinese with family members back in China, it's a natural thing for them to return, and overseas Chinese constitute a large part of the research community. So there's a large talent pool. So the programs generally have been very successful in attracting people back. But I would like to actually emphasize one point though, is that once they come back, the infrastructure that supports the research needs to keep up. So for example, if somebody comes back who does computer simulations, then you need not only the funding for him to buy computers, you need places for him to house the computers, electrical cables that can stand the power need of that thing. So it's a whole long process. So attracting the talent and keeping the talent here is not necessarily the same, and retaining the talent might be more difficult.
Yeah. I'm so glad, Zhang-Fan, that your living conditions and your salary has been significantly boosted throughout the years. But there's also another question that some of the people are saying that China's selection of these talents and these 1,000-people program is really controversial. Sometimes it's based only on academic research.
Right. So full disclosure, I'm not on a program, so so I'm not defending it for the sake of defending it. So yes. So it has very rigid rules. For example, how many years you need to spend overseas doing postdoc research. I'm not on a program because I come back too early. And sometimes it's purely on your existing research that maybe is not your idea, maybe because it's supervisor's idea in the past. So that kind of selection criteria needs to be improved over time, but that's a gradual process. You need to learn, gradually. But I wouldn't say that's because of that failure at some places that the whole program is a waste of money. I wouldn't say that, no.
Mr. Robocap, would you like to follow up on this? Our studio guest, Mr. Zhang-Fan, here said sometimes it do need some requirements and quotas regarding the selection of talents, but can the criteria, can it be lower? Can it be more flexible?
Well, I don't know if it's the bigger need is in terms of adjusting the criteria. I must confess I haven't looked at the program specifically, but when you think about it, I mean, all across the world, certainly leading economies have government support for, maybe not exactly like China's, where you're trying to repatriate talent, but for supporting scientific research and supporting scientists. That's a norm. The United States does a lot of that. It happens in Europe. So in that sense, programs with high criteria, those are normally a good thing. I would want to elaborate on a point that Zhang-Fan made regarding retaining the talent. And in addition to having kind of the infrastructure, I think there's this soft side that's really critical. And if you think about it, like Silicon Valley hasn't had specific program. It did actually in the early days. I've done some research on this. In fact, you mentioned my book at the beginning, and it looked at this specifically. So in the 1950s, yes, Silicon Valley was actively trying to retain these graduates from Stanford who were in fact leaving. And so they had that for a time, but afterwards, they didn't need to do that. You didn't need to try to make people to come to Silicon Valley. People wanted to come, and they would stay too, and they would stay because it was a fantastic environment. You could set up one company, you could sell that, you could do something else, you could go on to another company. It created this environment that was very sustainable. I think that notion of sustainability is going to be a real challenge for China going forward, and that means all sorts of things like livability, not just salary, but comfortable cities, really creative environments for doing your research, not just the infrastructure, but having other interesting people to work with to either form companies or research teams around. That sort of thing, I think, is a bigger challenge for China going forward.
Very interesting point, because my next question will go to you, Tony. Is Hong Kong a proper incubator city, or any other mainland Chinese city, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, Beijing? What do you think?
Well, I think Hong Kong, together with the Pearl River Delta, if you look at that, is actually a fantastic place for innovation and technology. I mean, if you look at it, what do you need for that? You need talents, and I think we have a lot. You need great educational institutions. I think Hong Kong certainly has a lot. You need to have a big market. I mean, Pearl River Delta is a part of that. You need to have an open society with free flow of information. I think Hong Kong has that. You need to have a vibrant sort of manufacturing and a technology center. Certainly, even across the border in Shenzhen, you have that. So if you think of Hong Kong, Shenzhen, or Pearl River Delta as San Francisco and Silicon Valley, so we got all the ingredients. Now, having the ingredient doesn't mean that you'll be successful. You need a lot of things to make it happen. For example, I think attracting talents is a very important issue. In Hong Kong people are very, very talented. They're very adaptive. But in a way, Hong Kong is trapped in a kind of situation, in a vicious cycle, because we do not have this tradition of innovation technology industry. So therefore, the bright people do not choose this area, to invest their career. But I think once you have the society sets the direction, then I think the talented people will come, and then it will be in a virtuous cycle, like Silicon Valley, like Robert was talking about. And this is what I think a policy, if there's anyone, should be invested in. You don't have to choose winners and losers. You set the environment, and then the world's best talent will come.
That may be Hong Kong's new impetus of its economy as well. Thank you very much, Tony Chen. And here, Zhang Fan.
My opinion, yes.
And Mr. Ravikant, we'll have you in our second panel discussion as well. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Stay with us here on World Insight, still to come. What's a country to do when it might take an arm and limb just to purchase a roof over one's head in major cities? Rising property prices are a source of major woes for China's middle class. Stay with us. Welcome back to World Insight. We move on to China's hot property market, an area undergoing another round of rapid growth. From February to August this year, 17 of 70 China's major cities witnessed price hikes of over 10%, despite regulations attempting to cool down the market. And some property giants are not so sure about keeping investing in this market. Have a look.
China's richest man made his fortune from the country's real estate, and today he's worried about the state of it. In an interview with CNN, Wang Jianlin, founder and chairman of Dalian Wanda Group, warns that China's housing market is spiraling out of control. On top of it being the biggest bubble in history, he said he doesn't see a good solution and shared that none of the government's measures have worked. Of the 17 cities which saw property price hikes, the top 5 saw a staggering increase of over 20%. Nanjing topped the list with a near 44% hike. Not on the list is Shanghai, but the city saw the biggest price hike this August.
The investment period of property market is too long, which influenced by policies and other unstable factors. The risk bubble is becoming larger.
Otherwise, to invest in property market or to invest in the stock market. But I think it could be more stable to invest the property.
Inflated property prices also hurt businesses' vitality and innovation.
Rising home prices also bring up other costs. This is unfavorable for innovation businesses and their young employees. It will divert funding from the real economy and innovation sector to the real estate bubble, which also involves financial risks in the future.
The government is expected to come up with more effective measures to control the growth of the house prices. But the housing crisis doesn't involve just prices. In the southeastern city of Shenzhen, mini flats with an area of only 6 square meters were sold at more than $130,000. So where is China's housing market headed to exactly remains a question.
All right, for more discussion on this question on China's red-hot real estate market, we have in our Beijing studio Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. In New York, we have Mr. Max Wolf, Professor of Economics from New School University. And in Hong Kong, we welcome back Mr. Robert Kapp, Network Director of the Economist Corporate Network. Welcome you, gentlemen. So let me start with you, Mr. Liu Baocheng. Mr. Wang Jianlin said that this is the biggest bubble in history. This is the biggest bubble ever that we are seeing. Do you agree? We've been talking about bubble for many, many years, but it continues to grow bigger and bigger, and it never seemed to burst.
Well, I would expect the next sentence he could spoke that is he responsible, for this, what he described as a bubble. But honestly, I do not see that there is really imminent bubble because many China watchers, China experts they expected long ago and time again that while China's housing market is ushering in a bubble, and that even can endanger the Chinese economy on the whole. But all of this sort of prediction was really defunct. So number one, that China, given all the rise price, China has large influx of migrant population, and right now the migrant workers account for 230 million people, and most of them still live in the basement. And now we also turn out 6 million college graduates every year, so the demand is really there. So the housing price is really pushed forward by the land sales of the local government, because that really contributes to the major revenue for the government budget. And the other is the real tough demand that is pushing this price high.
We'll talk about urbanization later in this program, but I would like to turn to Mr. Robert Kep there. So our studio guest here, Mr. Liu Baocheng, doesn't believe that it is really a bubble. What about you?
Well, I'm always cautious when contradicting Professor Liu, because I know he's very astute and well informed on a variety of topics, including property. But I would take a slightly different tact, and I think to his first point, which is legitimate, that this has been talked about for many years. He's totally correct. This has constantly been something that's raised. China has these inflated prices, they don't seem sustainable, and then year after year, the housing market continues to grow. So he's correct in that observation. However, I would further say the reason that's been sustainable is because the rest of the financial markets are so unsustainable. People put money into property because you can't legitimately put them into stocks, and the bond market is very shaky and also undeveloped and mispriced, and there are a whole bunch of issues there. So what you wind up with is there's really no other asset class that's that attractive, and you simply have all this wealth that's been very commendably generated here by China's ongoing growth, simply packed in more and more and more into property. So it's incredibly imbalanced, and I would say I'm on Wang Jinlin's side. They're saying this is a huge bubble and it's going to burst. It's a question of how and when and what the consequences are, but I think it's definitely a bubble.
Let's turn to our New York guest there, Mr. Wolf. Do you agree with Mr. Wang Jinling, or here in our studio, Mr. Liu Baocheng?
Yeah, so I also think that we have a little bit of a bubble. I'm not sure it's a bubble, but we have inflated prices, right? Bubble is always a little bit tricky because you can only really diagnose it for sure when it's too late, when it's popped, at which point the diagnosis sort of salts the wound. What I do think is that we have a major return to the cities. We have a little bit of a moving away from equities around the world, particularly in China, and you have newly minted wealth, and you have an upward concentration of wealth. And what that means is all of the primary drivers organically in the economy that push up property prices are in play, and New York has had a crazy run, very similar to the Chinese run, often pronounced a bubble, always about to burst, and somehow, in suspension of disbelief, in violation of the general laws of economics, hasn't burst for 25 years. So I've seen this too and live in it. The other thing I would add, though, is that both the U.S. Federal Reserve and some other global central banks are exporting inflation. So part of what happened is China was less badly, although still affected in 2008, 2009, and we haven't had a concerted fiscal policy response in the U.S. or in Europe, and so everything was done in monetary policy. So that meant we have all the organic inputs to a price expansion with really expansionary monetary policy, foot all the way on the gas for 8 years. And I think that's the reason I think these prices are meaningfully inflated, and they do have to revert to a mean, whether or not it's a bubble, and that price resettlement is never altogether smooth, and it's never without some victims and some collateral damage.
So it might be true that, because some are saying that Beijing's housing prices will eventually reach 200,000 RMB within the 4th Ring Road. I'm especially concerned when.
Well, based on the remark, actually, that's why people are in a hush, because, the government time and again reassured people with rounds of policies to bring down the housing prices. And it seems only in this area, the market is really playing a decisive role, despite of the good intention of the government. So it seems all around the policy are really being mischievous. So people have been really honestly losing trust over the next round of policy to bring down the housing prices. So now, with their money before it really shoots to the ceiling. So why don't I act now? And now that Chinese people still have a higher savings rate, and if they calculate their income versus the house prices, so that's really exorbitantly high. So now, they mobilize, and they also take advantage of the Chinese culture, mobilize the parents and cousins' money and to buy a house, just in case that it's going to shoot high.
Let's take a look at some numbers right now. The current housing market is seen risky. Home prices have surpassed people's incomes and already surged beyond the purchasing power of most ordinary people. Take a look at this. Shenzhen, Beijing, and Shanghai are the top 3 cities with the biggest gap between average house prices and monthly income. For someone working in Beijing, half a year's income can only purchase 1 measly square meter. And even more startling, among the top 6 cities with the highest price to annual income ratio worldwide, 4 are in China. So these outrageous property prices have closed the door to ordinary housing demand, while speculative buyers continue to purchase. Is this creating a vicious circle? Mr. Liu Baocheng here, you mentioned that the saving rate are really high here in China, but I've seen a report recently saying that only half of Chinese people really have savings. Is that contrary to what you're saying?
Well, actually, if you really see, of course, we talk about the national average, the divide between haves and have-nots is really being widened all the time. So actually, most of the houses are really purchased by the haves, or at least the middle class level. So right now, that is also the primary the market that real estate developers are really targeting at. They ignore virtually the half of the population who cannot really afford such a housing. Now that the local government, the real estate developers, the bankers, they really work together to sharp the price, because no one is really there to break up this whole game. So once one is there to choose a decline in the housing price, the other will be viciously predating over the marketplace. So now this is really the status quo over the tug of war between consumers and the rest of the interest groups.
But some of the regulations that the government has been promoting, for instance, destocking, for instance, the rise in down payment ratio, seems to go the other way around, seems to be contrary to its intention, to its incentive. Mr. Robert Kat there, what kind of regulations will be effective not to cool down, but to help promote a healthy property market?
I think much more fundamental changes are actually necessary, Natalie. It's not just a matter of, well, these can have effects, but the bigger issue in China is you have very inflated prices in these major metro areas, and you have stagnation and overstock in secondary and tertiary markets where there was an overinvestment. And unfortunately, that's where I think you most see the signs of what would be considered a bubble phenomena. This huge imbalance, this huge pocket of asset inflation versus this other area that's depressed, and it's contributing this destabilizing factor. The only way to really make something more stable in that scenario is to fundamentally change areas of, for example, fiscal and revenue generation, fiscal policy and revenue generation. So that would mean like giving local governments the power to tax and not simply rely on land sales as a way to raise money for projects they need to do. It requires a fundamental change in the way China is organized for its government finances, really. And that is a long process, and it's not something that has immediate effects, but it's the sort of thing that can only address these sorts of deep-rooted issues.
Mr. Wolf, only systematic change and reform is effective in this case?
Yeah, I think you need to see a concerted multi-agency policy response. I think the other thing you ultimately have to do if you want to make the property market less bubble prone is you have to invest in affordable housing, because part of what's happening here, which is more important than the bubble, is the housing markets, when incomes rise much less than the cost of housing, particularly in urban and desirable urban cores, you're just redistributing money through the rental system from the mass of working people to a small number of very affluent people. They'll continue to invest, and you'll end up with a property price dynamic where wealth, not income, drives the property prices. We have it in New York City. You have, I think, have it in a bunch of world cities, including some in China. And what that does is detach the cost of living from the price of property. And that just creates a situation where until it tops out, you have a systematic and massive wealth redistribution from the average working person to the investor class that's buying the properties for returns.
Mr. Liu Baocheng here in the studio.
Well,
give us an idea, especially our audience worldwide. How is China doing in terms of giving the low-income group the affordable housing, and why is it not showing? Because we're still seeing a lot of people, a lot of migrant workers and low-income family cannot afford either to rent or to buy a property.
So number one is the malignant hukou system is still at play. So the people are divided between first-class citizens and second-class citizens. And although the entire Chinese the reform and the rise in economic might is really contributed by those migrant workers, they are not really given all the fair treatment. And the other is that we do not really have a clear divide between affordable housing and commercial housing. So it seems that the government is trying to engineer on both sides, but the market doesn't really listen to the signal that the government is sending out. And of course, I think we also misplaced the concept of speculation, because in a market economy, speculators do send a more accurate signal that how the market is going to swing. So by really distinguishing this signal or put this signal into the black market, it can really be more detrimental. So because people can easily misread all the market signals. So I totally agree with our two previous guests' remarks. But yes, China needs a fundamental overhaul of the entire designing over the not only in the housing program, but also in concert with many other industries that is really interdepartmental work.
Professor Liu Baocheng, I would like to pick up what you said earlier about urbanization. I would like to discuss with our studio guests here, as well as New York and Hong Kong guests here, what role will urbanization play in this process? On one hand, it is, of course, bringing more migrant workers into the city, giving them more higher salary, more income to purchase a house. But on the other hand, many more people are gathering into metropolitan cities. They're driven away from rural areas and creating a wider gap between first-tier city and second and tertiary cities. So where is the healthy way out here, Mr. Liu Baocheng?
Well, I think it's really the equal treatment, so that they're given a fair opportunity and the same leveling ground. So the migrant workers, they are working extremely hard, and also they are equally talented, but they are deprived of the basic equal opportunities. So that's something that we cannot really tolerate anymore. And the other is really to encourage more of the entrepreneurship that migrant workers are able to set up their business to be protected equally, and also to encourage the fair competition between private business, smaller firms and micro firms versus the state-owned firms. And third is really to have a major retreat of those state-owned monopoly in the real estate area, because we already see that such a monopoly is in a quick formation, and they are there to jack up the price that is really unnegotiated by the other weak end of the consumers.
But if you're looking at the numbers in this urbanization process, Mr. Robert Kapp, we're seeing prices in first-tier cities rise, but in other cities down. Where is this heading?
Well, as I mentioned in my previous remarks, I think that's one of the most destabilizing aspects of what's going on, that you have In addition, it was interesting what Professor Wolf talked about in terms of this concentration of wealth and how that's imbalanced. And you indeed see that worldwide, but in China there are some unique features where you have really selective pockets of very high concentrated urbanization, to your point, Natalie, there. And those are sucking up this wealth. It's what Marx referred to as rentier capitalism that's occurring. And that is extremely destabilizing, I think, socially, and that's what your remarks, I think, were also getting at. Now, how do you deal with that? I mentioned the need for like taxation reform, fiscal policy harmonization, these sorts of initiatives that are very deep-seated and complex. I think that's one thing that has to be done. I think the other thing that is maybe part of this equation would be for the central government to look at ways to free up opportunities and even provide some Keynesian stimulation, meaning where the government would spend on projects in other areas outside of Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and so forth, try to encourage companies and development there. So far, that's been left more to local authorities. I think the central government could play a role in doing that to bring economic growth to those areas that could then help in that destocking of the overhang in property.
Robert, we're about to go, but we like to leave some time to our New York guest there, Mr. Wolf, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, no, I think what's important here is I think we need to recognize that the price of property redistributes wealth and affects the real wage the average person gets. And so policies designed generally to stimulate the economy at low interest rates all over the world, particularly egregiously here in New York and some places in the US too, have redistributed wealth by making it very, very lucrative to rent property. And that's actually a wage cut, and we need to figure out how to target that because it's an unintended negative consequence of an effort to stimulate the economy.
Thank you very much for your analysis. That was our New York guest, Professor Max Wolf, and here in Beijing, Professor Liu Baocheng, and in Hong Kong, Mr. Robert Kep. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, that's all for today. If you'd like to see more, you can visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Wang Yizhi, and everyone else here in World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights from across China and around the world. Goodbye.